All right, your player walks into practice late. What do? You put them all on the line and make them run? Do you sit them out from the game? What is it? I know as a coach, this can be one of the toughest parts of coaching is holding kids accountable to what the expectations of the team are. So, we're going to break down today some ideas for how you can hold your players accountable and what consequences might make sense for different situations. And if I haven't met you, I'm Coach Bre. I'm a mental performance coach for athletes, but I'm also a longtime head volleyball coach. Been coaching for the past 14 seasons, so I for sure have been in this situation. In fact, just yesterday, I had a player come into practice who forgot her binder. And one of the expectations is that you come to practice prepared for practice. And that means bringing your binder. So I'm going to talk through what I did in this situation and how I handle team consequences and punishments, just as a way for you to have some ideas of what you can be doing with your team as well. So first things first is that we have to first co-create standards and expectations for your team. This is what has to come right out the gate. If your players don't know what the expectations are and what the standards are for your team, then there's no way that they can actually do those things. And it might be common sense to think, well, you need to come on time to practice, but that might not be the case for a lot of athletes who don't have the sense of urgency, or maybe they haven't been in this sort of structure before. Now, I coach high school varsity, and so, we have a whole program of 36 to 48 girls, but when we start a season, we make it very clear on what the expectations are. Even before the season starts, I sit down with the leaders of my team and we go over what are the standards of our team and what are our core values. So we've had core values throughout our program for the past, I've been coaching here for 10 years, and they get clear on what these core values look like. So attitude, effort, integrity, unity are our four that kind of carry with us from season to season. But we break it down. Like, what does it look like in practice, in competition, in the hallways? And, in one of those situations comes practice. And part of the expectation for practice is that players are on time and that they're prepared. And so when we have these standards set out on what it looks like to be a member of the River Volleyball team, now we can talk from there. And so then I ask players, like, okay, what happens when an athlete breaks one of these standards or isn't showing, demonstrating the expectations? And obviously it depends on what the thing is, but some of the common ones are, what if they come to practice unprepared, and they forget something? They forget the shirt that they're supposed to wear that day, or the binder, or whatever, or they come late. Now, when I first started coaching, I used to have a lot of rules. I used to have a lot of like, you need to do this, you need to do that. And that just created more problems for me, to be honest, because then I had to remember what are all the things that I have to do when they break these expectations and rules. So I had to really, be honest with myself on like, what actually matters? What do we actually value? And so right now, 14 years later, yes, I do value, promptness. And so you need to be on time for practice. And what's nice about our practices is that they're after school. So players are there. I rarely have an issue with tardiness. And if there is, I usually address that one-on-one before I create some sort of team consequence for people. So it's very rare. We talk about how you need to notify the coach at least 24 hours in advance if you're not going to be at a practice. And then there's some consequences that come as a result from that. And if there is somebody that is late to practice, I will talk to them one-on-one and I'll say, hey, I noticed you're late today. What's going on? Our standard is that we're on time for practice. And even if there is there's typically a reason, I usually don't have the whole program run for something like that. There usually is a good reason for them being late, and it's one of those things where, yeah, I get it. I'm glad you're here is kind of what the message I send to them. When athletes are sending me a message and they're like, there's a car crash on the way to practice and, so I'm going to be late. My message back is be safe, please get here in one piece. And I'm glad that you're here. So you want to kind of create that culture through that. Now, if it's a chronic thing that continues to happen with one player, then we want to make sure that we're looping in the parent and all of those things. Okay. So my first point in all of this is that you have to be clear on what your expectations are, what your standards are. Be clear on what matters to you as a coach. You cannot have, I'm speaking from experience, every single little thing, because then you're going to create this culture of like, now we're always just like in trouble for things because people are always like breaking the standards. So what actually matters to you? And I'll tell you right now, tucking in their shirts and, all of those little things really don't matter to me anymore as much as like, okay, I want you to be on time. I want you to be prepared for practice. And I want you to give 100% when you're here with us. Okay. So co-create those standards, those expectations. Ask your team, what should be the consequence for coming in late? What should be the consequence for missing practice? For missing practice and coming in late, I find the best consequence is the natural consequence of losing playing time. Okay. Because we say if you don't come to practice, you cannot play in the game. Now, we have the difference between excused and unexcused practices. But so like it kind of differs. If there's an unexcused absence, meaning like they just skipped practice and they didn't let me know and they just weren't there, you cannot play in the next game. You still need to be there, but you're not going to play because we're going to honor and respect the girls that did show up. Now, if it's for an excused reason, so sickness, illness, things like that, then I say you can't start in the game, and then it's coach's discretion after that. So they won't start in a varsity game if they weren't there at the practice for an excused reason. But after that, it's my discretion. So I will always communicate with the player on what it'll be like, hey, you'll go in after the first set or something like that. But again, we want to give opportunities to the girls that are there. So that's just my stance. You don't have to do that. But I find that the best consequence is the natural consequence of losing playing time, because that's really what they want, is to play. And yeah, a quick set of lines. All right, now it's done. I mean, is that really going to stick with them? So if you really care about something and you want to emphasize it, loss of playing time is typically the consequence that we go with. Okay, the other thing about this is using exercise as punishment. I have a thing about this because I was a PE teacher for lots of years and I really don't like using exercise as punishment. That being said, I do from time to time have my girls run lines. For the girl who forgot her binder yesterday, we just have a team standard, and this was created with my team. They decided like, yeah, if somebody doesn't bring their binder or they bring the wrong color shirt for that day, we just run a set of lines. And so we do it as a program. It's just, as soon as they check in, we're like, hey, we got one set. They do their set and we say, hey, we got some extra conditioning in. Now let's make sure that we bring our binder. And for me, it's not that deep. It's not that big of a deal. They run a set and it's kind of a reminder of like, hey, let's make sure that we're prepared. You could, if you want, if you're like, I will not use exercise as punishment, you could say, if you forget your binder, you can't start in the next game. And that would probably be a little bit more like, oh, wow, this is a big deal. Okay. But then you have to remember to follow through on that. So that's up to you if you want to do that. I will never forget that. There was a girl who came late to the bus, that she was like 2 minutes late to the bus when we were leaving for a district tournament. And she was late for a good reason. I can't remember the reason now, but it wasn't like she just like overslept or something like that. But our expectation was, if you are not on time for the bus, you cannot play in the first set. So I didn't have, and she was a libero. So she was my libero. She couldn't play in the first set. We ended up losing that set. And like in this important district match, everyone was discombobulated. I was even like, oh my gosh, why do I have this rule? That's really hurting my team right now. Like, she was 2 minutes late. She had a good reason. Like, so you just have to be aware that when you set some of these things, you have to follow through with them. And so I actually got rid of that. Like, of course we want them to be on time for the bus. And if you're like, yep, no, we're going to stick with it. But for us, it was like, it wasn't worth what the stress that was added to the team. And you could, I guess, say like, well, that's her fault. She should have been on time, all this. But for me, it's more of like, I'm going to meet the person where they're at as a human and realize like, yeah, this was out of your control on why you were late. And if you have that strict rule in there, then you have the strict rule and you can't budge. And that's where I was at in that situation. So I default a lot more to like coach's discretion when it comes to these things now, just from experience. So anyways, using exercise as punishment, use that sparingly. I sometimes add it in to add some pressure in situations, which I'll talk about in a second, but there's other ways to add pressure than like the threat of physical punishment, because ultimately we want athletes to enjoy exercising. And, if you're designing your practices appropriately, like my athletes are getting a lot of conditioning in practice anyways. And so we don't need to stop the skill development to go like get more conditioning in. We can do skill development and conditioning at the same time. So that's my stance. Use it sparingly, use it like quickly. Don't spend a lot of time like making them run lines until they pass out, because that also really, from experience as a player, like kind of damages the culture of your team too, and kind of pit people against each other. If it's constantly like, all right, we're running for this, we're running for this person, running for that person, running for that person. Okay. But I do use it every once in a while. If we leave balls out, if we're not taking care of our equipment, if we forget things, like, I use that from time to time. I will say it's more of the lazy way out. So the more like, hey, I'm serious about this, is if you leave your balls out, we can't use it. We can't practice. We can't play. Like, that would be actually the more intense way to go. So ultimately you've got to decide what you want to do and, how you want to handle it. But for me, I use it sparingly. Okay. Now, create pressure on purpose. Like I said, it's important in our gym that we're creating pressure situations. And sometimes I add in some sort of sprinting or running to create a little bit more pressure. Yesterday, I did it in a serve receive drill where athletes, like the serve receive passers, had to get a 2.0 average. For every point that they were under that, they ran a quick set of lines. If any point they were over that, then the servers ran a quick set of lines. And I mean, it amounted to the most amount of time that athletes were working at a time sprinting was about 20 seconds. So it wasn't long. It was just one of those things like, just adding in a little bit of pressure. I don't like doing that as much as manipulating the score, having like serving pressure where everybody has to make a serve in. And then if somebody messes up, then we start back over. So that pressure is kind of building and building and building. I like creating pressure situations more like that. But regardless, you do want to create pressure in your gym, but you need to give them mental skills to be able to handle that pressure. So this is one of the ways that we help athletes with their mental training, is that by giving them ways to manage pressure in those moments. So we use mantras, we use a snapback routine, we use some breath work stuff. What are they telling themselves in those pressure situations? So in order to be able to use mental skills in pressure situations, they have to have the situation to use it in. So whether that is adding on some sets of lines or, manipulating the score where it's like, now you're down by this much and you have to, the score is now flipped, or you've got to get these 2 points in a row or else you lose the game, things like that. Opportunities to use their mental skills is really, really important. So if you want to learn the skills that I teach athletes in those pressure situations, whether it is because they've got a set of lines right after that or they're going to lose the game, head to coachbretraining.com. That's where I teach like the simple breathwork techniques, snapback routine, all of that I break down there. So that is kind of my take on it. Over the years, I will say that I started out very rigid and I had rules for everything and I had lines for everything. And I just couldn't keep track of it as a coach. It was not helpful for me. It was hurting my team. So now I'm really clear about co-creating standards and expectations. I actually have my players come up with some of the consequences that they think are appropriate in certain situations. I use exercise as punishment very sparingly. I use it in situations where it's like a quick thing to get done, maybe to add a little bit of pressure, but I create pressure on purpose in other ways by manipulating the score, by having really tough drills that they've got to work their way out of. Earn the Right is one of those drills. So I have a video all about Earn the Right that you can watch next. That's a really great mental training drill that incorporates a lot of physical training as well. But I will say overall, running a bunch of lines will not make your kids better servers. Running a bunch of lines will not make them better passers or shooters or whatever. Because that's one thing, is that if you're using exercise as punishment, please refrain from using it when it comes to skill development. Because if they're missing their serves over and over and over again, more likely it's because they need more reps in that area, not because they're not going to be able to like run a set of lines and then all of a sudden get better at serving. I do get the case for like, well, maybe it's a focus thing. Okay, then we can give them skills to be able to focus. That's where the mental training skills come in, and we have to teach them those skills, but they're not going to get better just by running lines. Okay, hopefully this was helpful. Go check out the Earn the Right video for more drills on pressure situations and mental toughness when it comes to developing skills as well. And I'll see you over there.